We have moved on to the next chapter in 1 Peter. We are now in 1 Peter chapter 3, all right? But I'm going to have to remind you a little bit of chapter 2 because of what we are covering in the beginning of chapter 3. So, you'll see the title, Love is More Than Primping, okay? I think many of the ladies might know what primping is, but I don't know if guys do because some women would say we don't do it enough. But anyway, primping means spending extra time to make your hair, clothes, and makeup look neat and nice. Key actions include fixing hair, checking in the mirror, and adjusting clothes. Okay? So love is more than that. Okay, so where are we going today? I want to remind you that we're still having our royal behavior that we learned in chapter 2. Christ our King showed us how to be royal. We need to respond like him. We need to obey those over us. You meet hostility with grace, always living right, and you leave judgment to God. And we saw that at the end of chapter 2 with the example Christ gave us. So let's start by reading the passage. It's going to be the first 7 verses of chapter 3 in 1 Peter. And it says, Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands. As Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. Husbands likewise, dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. Okay, so where are we going? This is definitely a message that I'll probably somehow, some way get in trouble with either the women or with the men. Okay,
or both.
Or both, right? So I'm going to do my best job here, and I'm not going to single anybody out, especially my wife. Okay, so why are we going there? Okay, we're still on a submit kick, if you want to call it that, in 1 Peter. Okay, we have submit to your employers. Remember, I'm going the wrong way. We had submit yourselves to every ordinance of man. Submit to the government is how we started mid-chapter 2. And then employees should be submissive to their bosses with all fear. We saw that the next week. And then we looked at the way Christ was our example, okay? It says, for this, in verse 21 of chapter 2, for to this you were invited or called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow in his steps. Okay, the thing we're focusing on still is Christ, our example. Okay, and so I'm going to lead you to the so what. It's a little bit of a two-part so what. You can put yourself in either group. I'm not just talking to wives. I'm not just talking to husbands. I hope to give you all something to glean from this. So just because if you aren't married, don't think that you can't apply any of this stuff today. All right. And Rachel and Matt, I won't single you guys out either, except like I just did. All right, so ladies, respectful behavior builds a happy home much better than good clothes or makeup. And men, recognize the hard work she puts into the home and into her looks, then tell her. All right, so jumping into verse 1 of the 3rd chapter, and again, a lot of times we jump to the next chapter. I've told people before, I'd love to do a series on poor chapter endings, okay? The chapters and the verses are not inspired by God, and sometimes I wonder if men had an ulterior motive when they made this split on the chapter. But right off the bat, we see, verse 1 of chapter 3, Wives, likewise be submissive to your own husbands. Okay, so one of the things I want to look at, likewise. Wives, likewise. Well, wait, we're at the beginning of the new chapter. there. Everything that's gone before doesn't matter. Likewise, wives, likewise there. Okay? In the same way. So wives, in the same way, be submissive. Well, Mike, that still doesn't answer the question. Okay? What's in the same way? Like Christ. We just finished chapter 2 talking about how Christ lived and what he went through for us. And so, men, I hate to tell you, but this is a book of suffering, okay? And so telling the women to submit to your own husbands is because Peter thinks that's suffering, okay? So we keep that in mind. So wives, like Christ, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word. Another thing here, to your own husbands. I have been in church circles where the men thought they got to dictate to all the women, and it's like, we don't do polygamy, they're not your wife, so you got to be careful what you think you can and can't tell a woman to do, all right? And so, what did we see? Because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps. You'll see this maybe one more time to make the point. Okay, the next thing that I want to do is I want to show what is the, I got this out of order. Okay, to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, and this is kind of cool when you think about it, is that women, he's talking specifically to even if some don't obey the word. Not all. He's not just talking to the wives that have to submit in specific ways when their husband's not a believer. He's just adding a little addendum there, if your own husbands, if they do not obey. And it's kind of interesting that this idea of obey is not to allow oneself to be persuaded, not to comply with, okay? So basically, a heretic, a man that just wants nothing to do. It says to refuse or withhold belief, and to disbelieve willfully and perversely. So this is the type of do not obey the word when a woman that is a believer is married and she has a husband that is not a believer. This is the extent that Peter's saying you still got to put up with it. You still got to submit to it, okay? And so they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives. I'm missing some things on my slides, folks. That's all right. Maybe it's meant to be shorter. Okay, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives. I like to point out that conduct here is the same conduct we've been talking about, that when we do things, we are, God, the righteous judge, is the one that evaluates our conduct, and we should be aware of that with all fear. So again, that word conduct is here. And so they, without a word, without nagging, may be won by the manner of life. You know, sometimes I know women like to try to help their husbands out, and we have to be careful. And I guarantee you, men think nagging happens a lot sooner than women think it happens, okay? So, just keep that in mind. Without nagging, without a word, they may be won. So again, a woman is living an example to her husband in a manner that he, perversely disobeying or trying to avoid the word, is going to want to see how she behaves, and then that is what would win him. Because I want to make a point here is that a wife having to submit to an unbelieving husband is a much more difficult place than if she had a believing husband. Think about that. Guys, we should be making our wives' lives easier, and I'll get to you here soon. But again, if they're an unbelieving spouse, that's hard for a believing woman. And we need to recognize that if there's any women here that their husband is not a believer, we need to recognize they got their work cut up for them. And we, as husbands, should be loving and as believers, so they shouldn't have it as hard, all right? Don't compare notes, women. You're not supposed to do that. Okay, so they without a word may be won by the manner of life of their wives. What? When they observed your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Okay, again, they observe this. Again, chaste is pure, and again, manner of life. So that when they, the unbelieving husband, or even the believing husband, observe your pure behavior or manner of life accompanied by fear. Okay, and fear here can also mean respect. So you see, fear is used and terror is used a couple times in this passage, and I want to try to shed some light on that. And so when they observe your pure manner of life accompanied by respect, that's still with my brain trying to put together, what are you saying? What does that mean? And like I'm prone to do, I like jumping to the Hawaiian pigeon version to try to make some sense of it, right? So again, Hawaiian pigeon, verse number 1 from Peter 3:2, okay? They without, or that's verse 2, says, they going to see how you do everything with plenty respect and stay only good, okay? It makes pretty clear sense to me, right? Is that they're going to do everything you do as a woman, as a wife to an unbelieving or even believing house. They're going to see that you're respectful and you're only doing good things. Okay, it says, do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging of the hair, wearing of gold, or putting on fine apparel. Okay, so this is, I know, I've heard rumors. I don't know if I've ever sat through a sermon where a preacher really felt he had to give it to the women, but I've heard rumors that has happened, okay? What I want to show here is I pulled it out of Barnes' Notes on the Whole Bible because I was trying to get my head around how I can explain this without getting myself in trouble. Okay, and so if you don't like this, you can get mad at Barnes on the Notes of the Whole Bible, okay? What I want to show here is that this gentleman, Barnes, Notes on the Whole Bible, he said, and I chopped it because he said a whole mouthful probably to keep himself out of trouble with his wife. But it says, God does not condemn real ornament. The universe is full of it. The colors of the clouds and the rainbow, the varied hues of flowers, or the beauty of the human complexion, the ruddy cheek. Few or none of these things are absolutely necessary to the things which they are attached. It's a mouthful to say that those things are not necessary in their existence. It's not the point they serve. The ruddy cheek and the glow of the color of your lips and things like that. The things that we find decorative, the things that we find appealing, those are not the things that their primary purpose. Because saying that God made those things because he likes beauty, he likes ornament. And it says, and so the apostle, but God meant that this should be a beautiful world. And the apostle, Peter, does not prohibit that which would have this effect in the wife. So again, love is more than primping. It's not only primping, okay? And he continues and he finishes with, the grand thing which she was to seek was not that which is merely external, but that which is internal and which God regards as of so great value. That's the idea, is your focus is not how good you look for church on Sunday. Your focus is how good your heart's in the right place for church on Sunday, right? And again, so do not let your adornment be merely outward. So jumping on to verse 4. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. Okay, the hidden person of the heart. The heart here is the center and the seat of spiritual life. The heart here is what it makes you who you are. And so they're saying who you are in the Holy Spirit. That is the hidden person of the heart that you want to strive to be. And it's with incorruptible beauty and of a gentle and quiet spirit. What's interesting about this is that the gentle and quiet spirit has only used like 3 or 4 times each in the whole New Testament, and then which is very precious in the sight of God, and this precious is also used very rarely in the New Testament. And so this gentle, I gotta see if I got my notes in order. So but let it be the incorruptible beauty of a gentle, which shares the same type of lingo, if that's the right term. When you look at the Beatitudes, okay, gentle is the same as the meek shall inherit the earth, right? And then there is also the yoke of Christ, right? Yoke, Y-O-K-E, the thing that you put on oxen, not the thing you get out of an egg, okay? And so that Christ in that passage says, take my yoke upon you, for my burden is light. So it's gentle. So Christ is saying he himself is a gentle teacher in that regard. And then quiet is only used twice, and it's an undisturbed by external agitation and free from internal strife. This is the thing, ladies, that Peter is trying to tell you to focus in on, is an undisturbed by external agitation, i.e. your husband, maybe, right? Okay? And free from internal strife. I'm not submitting to that. Right? That's kind of an internal strife going on because you don't think you get to pick and choose when you submit to your husband. Okay? So continue on, it says, for in this manner in former times. So, just like what happened in the past in former times, the holy women of God, the holy women who trusted in God, also adorned themselves. What did they adorn themselves with? The quiet and gentle spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God, very costly in the sight of God. And so here we want to see is what's interesting is trusted is actually the third option for this Greek word. The first two options is hoped. The holy women who hoped in God, okay, also adorned themselves. So this is your example on how you are to behave as a woman is found in the Old Testament, the holy women of the Old Testament who hoped in God. And we're going to see a specific example in that adorn themselves. What they adorn themselves is being submissive to their own husbands. And again, a critical, their own husbands, okay? I don't know if anybody's ever seen that, heard that, been around where the men just dominate the women in the church and think they can do because they're supposed to submit. Okay? It's to your own husbands. So husbands, keep your own wife in control, not somebody else's. Okay, so again, what is our example that Peter gives? In verse 6 of 1 Peter 3, we see as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. That probably chaps a few women, okay? Whose daughters you are if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. Okay, here's where I want to jump in and show the difference between the Greek word used for submit and the Greek word here used for obey, just to kind of set the tempo here. The primary difference between the Greek words submit and obey lies in their core concepts. Submit means voluntary relational alignment or cooperation. You say that again. Submit means voluntary relational alignment or cooperation. Whereas obey means behavioral obedience or following a direct command. So when a woman submits to a man and then she obeys him, she's choosing because she voluntarily made that alignment with her husband to submit to him, and then if he says something or requests of something, that is the obey of a direct command. Okay, and so whose daughters you are if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. This was another one. If you do good. Daughters, if you do good. So what's cool about this, whose daughters? Think about it. So Peter started out the book addressing the Jews. So Peter is still very much talking in a Jewish mindset, even though we learned in chapter 2 that we're looped into that, we're a new people, right? A peculiar people for God. But daughters, so he's saying now, not only to the Jews, that your daughters of the women from the Old Testament, but now we Gentiles are as well. And he's saying, if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. Okay, this one threw my brain a little bit as well. What do you mean if you do good and are not afraid with any terror? You know, because this is the only place it's worded like this, you have commentators kind of going in a really haphazard, like, no unified, in my opinion, unified thought process. So, what do I do when I can't understand the bigwigs in the theological circles? I go to the Hawaiian Pidgin. Okay? It says, you wahins, you like her, who's Sarah, because you're doing the good kind stuff and you no need worry about nothing. Okay? That is what he's saying. That is what Peter's trying to tell you is that you behave like Sarah, and if you do the good kind stuff, then you don't need to worry about nothing. Okay? So that's what he's trying to tell you. So now, are you women tired of hearing me talk about the way you should behave? Yeah. Yet? That was a rhetorical question. Okay, Husbands, likewise, dwell with them with understanding. Okay, husbands, likewise. Here's that likewise again. And again, where are we at? We're following chapter 2 that Peter didn't write in chapters. He continued on the thought all the way from submitting to government to the way Christ suffered and what he submitted to the will of the Father onto the wives. And now we're talking to the husbands. Husbands, likewise, in the same way, like Christ. And we saw that verse. I told you I threatened, and here it is to show you. It's because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps. Okay, if you might notice, there's a little bit of something missing in this verse. We'll get there, okay? But I really wanted to show that, because, like I said, we'll get there. It says, husbands, like Christ, dwell with them with understanding. And I really hope this idea that I brought out, I think I stole it from a couple of different definitions for the Greek word. But this, dwell with them with a special kind of deep, personal, and spiritual insight rather than simple facts. Just because you remember her birthday doesn't mean you're living with her in understanding. Just because you remember your anniversary doesn't mean you're living with her in understanding. It's a special kind of deep, personal, and spiritual insight rather than simple facts. Okay? Know who your wife is. Don't just expect things out of your wife, but get to know who she is, what makes her tick, and what makes her ticked off, right? Okay? Those are the types of things you should be doing, okay? And not like this guy. Taking 1 Peter 3:1 out of context was bad enough, but using a bell to summon his wife was both stupid and dangerous. All right? This is not the living with the woman in understanding. So I do not advise trying that, okay? Sidebar, maybe I shouldn't have thought it in this pattern, but we had a great memorial service for Joe. Right? And thank you for the church, all the church members that came and partook. That family saw the love of Christ. They were amazed. They were just like, wow, this is great that their dad had this church family. So thank you for that. But again, if I don't want to do any more funerals than I have to. So don't use a bell to summon your wife. It's a little dangerous. I might take her side on it, possibly, okay? All right, as to the weaker vessel, okay? I don't know where other speakers have gone with this, but it's calling husbands to co-dwell as with the weaker vessel. Recognizes female physiological vulnerability in the ancient world without implying spiritual inferiority. Some big words out there. Sorry, ladies, you're the weaker vessel physiologically. That's why we don't want men in women's sports, right? Okay? So, men are supposed to live with understanding, but again, it's not just because of the physiological weaker vessel, but because we're supposed to be living with them in understanding. We're supposed to get to know them, know what fears they have, what cares they have, okay? Because why? Because we're giving honor to the wife. This giving here is I can't see all my notes, sorry. But this giving here is apportioning. That's the word I wanted to use. It's apportioning, okay? And so it's giving value to the honor. And honor, so slow down there. Giving is apportioning honor, which is value and respect. Okay, this word honor here means value. It has worth to it, and you're giving it to her, your wife, because you're apportioning her share of the honor and the respect that she deserves in that relationship. Okay? So then, continuing on. Okay, giving honor to, so here's why. We're still in verse 7. We're still talking to the husbands. Okay, and we're talking about living with our wives in understanding. And it says, because as being heirs together of the grace of life, being heirs we're together in the grace of life. I'll show you that in a sec, but I wanted to show you another one where we're heirs together and how important we recognize the relationship we have with our wife, because we have another relationship that's very important to us where we're co-heirs as well. And that we'll see in Romans 8, verse 16. It says, the Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. That's the co-heir we have with our wives that we have, okay? The same thing that makes us co-heirs with Christ makes our wives co-heirs with Christ, makes our wives co-heirs with us. And so, I didn't finish reading that verse, but if indeed we suffer with him, there's that suffer word again, that we may also be glorified together. So again, and as being heirs together of the grace of life. Going the wrong way again, folks. And the grace of life, I like this term. Remember, I tell you this all the time. Peter's got an eternal mindset. And think about it. When you look at that grace of life, grace is one thing, but grace, that's our eternal life. We are heirs together. So you better live in understanding with your wife now, because guess what? She's going to be in heaven with you. And I think sometimes that might be why God says there's no giving or taking in marriage in heaven. Okay? Because, women have had enough of it. Possibly. Okay? All right. So the grace of life, the eternal mindset, that your prayers may not be hindered. That your prayers may not be hindered. I tell people a lot, if you just pray and you don't read your Bible and then you wonder why your prayers aren't answered, that's why you need to read your Bible, because you find out things about the way you should be praying and why prayers don't get answered. And if you're not living with your wife in an understanding way and showing her the love and the respect that she does, and you value what she does, then your prayers will be hindered. Okay? Your prayers will be hindered if you're not living with your wife in an understanding way. See, I kind of love it. I think 5 verses for the women, or 6 verses for the women, and 1 for the man, but I love picking on the men because I can get away with it. But seriously, is that you do your best to show your wife the love that you have for her and respect her. And that's an ulterior motive. If you want your prayers answered, you better live understanding, right? If you can't do it because you love her, do it because you want your prayers answered. Is that an okay thing to say? Okay, so that leads me to my so what? Ladies, respectful behavior builds a happy home much better than good clothes or makeup. And the only thing I'll say about respectful is, well, my husband doesn't deserve respect. Okay, maybe he doesn't, but maybe if you start treating him with the respect that he doesn't deserve, he might start living with you in an understanding way. Okay, it goes both ways, and so somebody's got to quit throwing down the gauntlet. Okay, sadly, a lot of times it is the woman that does that. Men are a little too prideful. Ladies, respectful behavior builds a happy home much better than good clothes or makeup. Men, recognize the hard work she puts into the home and into her looks, then tell her. Guys, we need to be more aware. We need to pay attention, right? I mean, I've seen some, guys in a room, a dorm room or whatever, they have like a chair, a desk, and a computer to play games. That's it, okay? And some of us guys are probably like, why can't we just have that instead of all this fluffy, frilly, all kinds of stuff, okay? But believe it or not, guys, it does make our homes look better, okay? And then all the dolling up she does, I love it. I get up in the morning, I take my shower, it takes less than 5 minutes, and I get all dressed and ready for the day. 15 minutes, and I can be out the door. I don't know how long it takes her, but I'm not going to say no. It takes a while, guys, and we should recognize the effort that our wives put into things. So point to ponder. Ladies, are you following the example set by Sarah and the holy women of old? And note, I don't say the old holy woman, I say the holy women of old, okay? Are you following the example set by Sarah? That's the thing I didn't get to talk about is that whole passage where Peter is saying that like Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. That's Genesis, that's your reading assignment, Genesis 18. It's the only place that Sarah ever called Abraham Lord. Okay? It was of her own volition, even to the point she technically did not say it. She thought it. And she thought it when Jesus and the two angels visited Abraham before the two angels went to Sodom and Gomorrah. And Jesus tells Abraham that Sarah's going to have a kid. And that's when Sarah says, is my Lord going to have, are we going to have a child with my Lord so old, or something to that effect? So I think that's why Peter used that passage to say it's got to be from the heart. It's the hidden treasure of the heart. She naturally called him her Lord. I'm not saying women don't start calling your husbands Lord. No, we're in a little more modern times than that. But the idea is that whole concept, the treasures of the heart submitting to the husband. And then men, are your prayers hindered? Are you being understanding to your wife? I've seen a lot of, trust me men, a lot of you do not live understanding to your wife. I know I'm guilty of it. Okay? And I'm a pastor, how dare I be guilty of that, right? But really give that consideration. I'm not saying that it's in everything and that you're lousy husbands, even if your wife says that. No. But seriously, give her, make sure you're working at that. Don't just assume that things are going great in your marriage. You need to understand her. All right. And then for next week, begin memorizing 1 Peter 3, verses 8 and 9. And then read Genesis chapter 18. It's just a little refresher, and you'll see where Sarah laughs because she thinks she's going to have a kid at about 95, I think, or something like that. 90, somewhere in there. 80 something. Women would know that date. I don't. Okay, so read Genesis chapter 18. Okay.